The Cartier watch stopped at exactly 12:36 a.m. on August 31st, 1997, the moment Princess Diana's heart stopped beating in that Paris hospital. For decades, that moment lived in silence, sealed beneath official reports and royal grief. Until, in August 2025, a forgotten box arrived at Buckingham Palace, addressed not to Charles, but to Princess Anne. It wasn't wrapped in silk or ribbon, just plain brown paper, slightly torn at the edges, tagged with her title and a note, private. For Anne, she expected it to be a misfiled item from Sandringham storage, but as she pulled away the wrapping and opened the lid, her hands stilled. Inside sat Diana's old jewelry box, mahogany, worn, and unmistakable. Not the public collection. This was personal. Anne remembered it. Everyone did. Inside the lid, a folded envelope rested, sealed with pale wax. On the front, in Diana's unmistakable handwriting, it read, "For Anne. Open when you're ready to know the truth." What followed would unravel a narrative the public had clung to for 28 years. Not just about a princess lost too soon, but about secrets buried, regrets silenced, and a story Diana entrusted to the only royal she believed would protect it. The stoic Princess Royal, who had weathered decades of scandal with armor-like restraint, sat in stillness, the letter trembling in her hand. Diana had chosen her. Not Charles, not William, not even the Queen. Her. And now, everything Anne thought she knew was about to change. It had been an ordinary August morning. Anne had just returned to Gatcombe Park after a week of royal engagements. Her desk was stacked with updates from her patronages and palace correspondence. Among the routine papers was a small parcel, unremarkable at first glance. It bore no royal seal, no courier's urgency, just a tag marked HRH the Princess Royal, private. She opened it absently, expecting misplaced documents or some ceremonial item returned from storage. But when the brown paper peeled away and revealed the mahogany jewelry box, time paused. She recognized it instantly. The Spencer crest glinted faintly on the lid. This wasn't a gift. It was Diana's private jewelry case. Anne hadn't seen it since 1997. The scent rose before she even lifted the lid. Jasmine, faint but lingering, preserved after all these years. Inside were a few small, intimate items. A bracelet, a photograph, and beneath them, a sealed envelope in cream stationery. The handwriting stopped her breath. Diana's, elegant, fluid, familiar, across the front, Anne. She opened the letter without ceremony. The message was dated July 25th, 1997, and the first words stunned her. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And the truth I could never say out loud needs to be told, by someone who understands what silence costs." Anne froze. Diana had never written to her before. Not like this. They had not been close, not in the way the public might imagine. But there had been respect, a quiet, mutual understanding. Anne never chased the spotlight. Diana had run from it. That alone had bonded them, even if only from a distance. "You never asked me to perform," the letter continued. "You never looked at me like I was a scandal waiting to happen. You saw me, and that's why I'm leaving this with you." Anne sat in stunned silence. The jewelry box was not a keepsake. It was a confession, and it had waited nearly 3 decades to reach the one person Diana believed would not exploit it. What Anne would uncover inside, beneath the lining, tucked between pages, whispered through ink and tape, would unravel everything she thought she knew about her brother's former wife, and everything the monarchy believed it had buried with her. Anne unfolded the letter with deliberate care, bracing herself. The paper was heavy, the ink slightly faded, but legible. Diana's handwriting wavered in places, not theatrical, but honest. She had written it with intent, not for sympathy, but for truth. "You've always moved through this world differently, quiet, composed, untouchable. I used to think you didn't care, but over time I realized you just understood the cost of being seen." Anne read slowly, the words landing harder than she expected. Diana didn't flatter. She acknowledged their distance, their differences, but beneath that was admiration, maybe even envy. I fought everything. The press, the protocol, the expectations. And I made mistakes. God, did I make mistakes. But you endured. And that's why I'm trusting you with this. Not because we were close, but because you never tried to shape me into something I wasn't. There was no self-pity in the letter, only reflection. Diana described a growing sense that she was being watched, not by paparazzi, but by something deeper, more dangerous. People who didn't just want to control the narrative, but erase her from it. She spoke of the isolation after her divorce, of doors closing quietly, of allies vanishing, of being treated less like family and more like a liability. By the time I started asking the right questions, it was already too late. I wasn't the girl they married into the family anymore. I was a problem to manage. Anne's face was unreadable. She had always prided herself on keeping emotion private. But this letter, this raw, final trust, cut past that. If anything happens to me, and this box reaches you, know that it was not an accident. Someone will say it was. But you're smarter than that. You've always known how to read between the lines. At the bottom of the page was a small postscript, one that struck deeper than the rest. Tell the boys their mother loved them, with her whole imperfect heart. And if they ask you one day whether I gave up, tell them no. I fought. I just didn't win. Anne folded the letter with slow hands, eyes distant. Diana hadn't left her a mystery to solve. She'd left her a burden to carry. And Anne, who had never let herself cry in public, not even at Diana's funeral, now felt something foreign rising in her chest. This wasn't a royal duty. This was something else entirely. Anne returned to the jewelry box, her hands slower now, gentler. Beneath the folded letters lay small, deeply personal objects, tokens that weren't meant for display. A delicate silver charm bracelet with two tiny engraved initials, W and H. A dried flower pressed into a folded napkin labeled Kensington Garden, 1992. A candid photo of Diana laughing with her sons at what looked like a private picnic. Hair windblown, no makeup, no posing, just joy. Then she found the velvet pouch. Inside it was a locket, white gold, heart-shaped, with a single diamond at its center. Anne didn't recognize it. Diana had never worn this piece in public. She clicked it open. On one side, a photograph of Charles and Diana in the early years, laughing, relaxed, before everything fell apart. On the other, a grainy ultrasound image. Anne's breath caught. She stared at it, struggling to process what she was seeing. It was unmistakable, a fetus mid-gestation. No names, no notes, just an overwhelming silence. Tucked beneath the pouch was a folded slip of paper. Her name was Elizabeth Rose. The note, written in Diana's hand, was dated December 1985. The ink was smudged, and the handwriting frantic. Nothing like the calm tone of the previous letter. She wasn't from an affair. She was ours. I lost her, and I told no one. Not Charles, not the Queen, not the boys, only the priest at Althorpe. Anne read the words again and again. Diana had miscarried a child, a daughter, and buried her in secret. No announcement, no ceremony. Just a headstone marked beloved daughter, hidden in the Spencer family cemetery. I visit her every year on December 23rd, Diana had written. That's her birthday. If anyone noticed, they never asked why I disappeared before Christmas. Anne sat back, stunned. She remembered those holidays. Diana often arrived late, withdrawn. They had all chalked it up to tension, to Charles, to the relentless press. But all along, she had been mourning a child the world never even knew existed. Anne was no stranger to loss, but this wasn't grief as the royals understood it. Public, polished, processed through duty. This was lonely, unacknowledged, buried. and Diana had carried it alone until now. Anne was about to close the box when she noticed a thin crease beneath the velvet lining, barely visible, but just enough to catch the light. Her fingers pressed into the seam, and the false bottom gave way with a soft pop. Inside was a final envelope, worn at the edges. Unlike the others, it wasn't sealed with wax. It had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had nearly split. Scrawled on the front, in hurried handwriting, "For Anne, urgent, do not ignore." She opened it slowly, already sensing this letter would be different. The date confirmed it, August 30th, 1997, just one day before Diana died. The tone was unlike anything Anne had read so far, rushed, trembling, written by someone afraid of what she knew. "If something happens to me in Paris, this is why." Anne's eyes narrowed. She continued reading, every word unraveling the story history had tried to bury. "I didn't go to Paris for love, not for Dodi. That's what they want the press to believe, but it's not the truth." Diana explained how, 3 weeks earlier, she'd been approached, not directly, but through an anonymous courier who left a manila envelope at her Kensington apartment. No return address, no contact name, just a file of documents and a handwritten note. The documents were copies of confidential medical records from a private clinic in London, dated late 1985, confirming her pregnancy, the miscarriage, and post-treatment scans. Diana wrote that they were legitimate. She remembered the doctors. The details were exact. "They shouldn't exist, Anne. These records were supposed to be sealed, destroyed. But someone had them, and they knew exactly what they were holding." The letter detailed the threat. Whoever sent them wanted her gone. Not dead, not directly, just erased, silenced, forgotten. A scandal waiting to be detonated if she didn't comply. The demand was chillingly simple. Disappear from public life. Stop speaking. Stop traveling. Stop challenging the monarchy's image. No more interviews, no more activism. Just fade away, quietly. If I didn't comply, they'd release everything. The baby, the burial, that I never told Charles, that the royal family ignored it, that I buried our daughter in secret like she was something to be ashamed of. Anne sat perfectly still. Diana hadn't gone to Paris to escape the paparazzi. She had gone to buy time, to think, to plan, to figure out what to do next. Dodi thinks this is a romantic getaway. It's not. He doesn't know anything. I couldn't tell him. I couldn't tell anyone, except you. Anne could feel it now, how desperate Diana had become. The cornered urgency in every word. She hadn't trusted security. She hadn't trusted the palace, but she had trusted Anne. "They wanted to paint me as hysterical, paranoid, but you've seen the way things work. You know how easy it is to disappear in plain sight if the right people say nothing." And then, toward the end, a shift. Diana wasn't just afraid. She was resolute. "I won't let them define me. I've made mistakes, yes, but I will not let them erase me. Or her." Elizabeth Rose deserves to be remembered. There was no signature, just the last few lines, written in a firmer hand, steadier than before. "I'm not asking you to go public. I'm asking you to remember. If they succeed, if I don't come home, someone has to remember what really happened. Someone has to protect my sons from believing the lie." Anne sat motionless. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what to do. This wasn't a matter of state. It wasn't palace protocol. It wasn't about preserving tradition. This was about a woman whose final act hadn't been running away. It had been trying to protect everything she loved from forces she couldn't name. Anne didn't need to ask who they were. She'd lived long enough behind the curtain to know that silence can be orchestrated, and that the royal image was often protected with surgical precision, no matter the human cost. Now she was holding the price of that silence in her hands, and she wasn't sure she could carry it. Anne returned to the box once more. Beneath the final letter, nestled under the lining, lay a bundle of folded pages tied with blue ribbon, soft, creased, and marked with the quiet weight of secrets. It was Diana's diary, or at least excerpts from it. 12 pages, each dated, handwritten, no flourishes, just thoughts on thick paper that still held the scent of the room they were written in. The first entry was dated July 6th, 1997. I've been thinking about us again, not Charles and me, not the family, you and me, Anne. Anne blinked. That was unexpected. I've spent so much of my life trying to be understood and failing. But you never tried to understand me. You just let me be. That meant more than you know. Diana's words weren't poetic. They were unfiltered. Scattered thoughts, confessions, regrets, and small, private joys. She didn't present herself as a victim, just a woman trying to reclaim what was left of her identity before it was rewritten by others. The entries moved through familiar territory. Her divorce, the loneliness that followed, the media circus, but it was her internal life that struck Anne most. Sometimes I look in the mirror and don't recognize myself. I became the image they projected, and now I can't find the real version beneath the layers. But I want to. I'm trying. Anne flipped to the next entry, dated July 22nd. I miss being a mother more than being a princess. The palace thinks I left to rebel. They didn't understand. I left because I wanted my boys to grow up knowing what love felt like when it wasn't scheduled. There was anger in the lines, yes, but also maturity. Diana wasn't writing to lash out. She was searching, reflecting. Then came August 10th. I've made a decision. I'm going to end things with Dodie. It was never real, just noise, a distraction. I keep pretending I've moved on, but the truth is, I haven't. I don't want headlines. I want peace. I want my life back. Anne felt her throat tighten. She had assumed Paris was another escapade, a tabloid whirlwind, but Diana had been planning to leave that life behind. Not for Charles, not for a romantic fairy tale. For herself, and for her sons. I've written a letter to the Queen. Not sure if I'll send it, but I asked if there's a way to re-enter quietly, to support causes, not cause disruption, to show the boys that strength isn't always loud. That was not the Diana Anne remembered from press briefings or palace meetings. This woman had grown, scarred and wiser. There was humility on the page. Grace. The final entry was dated August 30th, 1997, the night before her death. The handwriting was shaky. I keep picking up the phone to call you. I put it down each time. What would I even say? Help me? Warn them? Do something? You'd know what I meant without explanation, wouldn't you? Anne's breath caught. I'm scared. Not of dying. Not anymore. I'm scared of vanishing. Of them turning me into a symbol instead of a person. If I don't make it back, don't let me be rewritten. It ended there. No sign-off. No signature. Just white space that hung heavier than the words themselves. Anne lowered the pages into her lap and stared at the wall. For a long time, she didn't move. She had always believed emotion belonged behind closed doors. That composure was strength, but now, reading Diana's final desperate words, she felt something collapse. Not loudly, not publicly, but deeply. Diana hadn't been chasing the spotlight in those final weeks. She'd been chasing the right to exist. Honestly, imperfectly, and fully. And in trusting Anne with her truth, she had passed that burden, or maybe that mission, into the only hands that wouldn't sell it. At the very bottom of the jewelry box, underneath the last layer of fabric, lay something Anne hadn't noticed before. It was thin, rectangular, and wrapped in parchment. As she unwrapped it, her breath caught. A cassette tape. On the front, in Diana's hand, were 5 words. For Anne? Play this alone. Anne held it for a moment, unsure why her pulse quickened. It had been years since she'd seen anything recorded on tape. She opened a drawer in her sitting room and retrieved an old player, used occasionally to review archived interviews. She slid the cassette in and pressed play. There was a crackle of static, then silence, and then, "Hello, Anne." The voice was unmistakable, not the rehearsed, camera-ready tone the public had come to know. This was Diana, low, quiet, unguarded, the sound of someone speaking late at night, alone, just trying to get it all out. "I've rewritten this a dozen times. Deleted, re-recorded. I'm probably still getting it wrong, but I don't think I'll get another chance." Anne didn't blink. "You're the only one I could trust with this. You never tried to fix me. You never pitied me. You just let me breathe. That's rare in this family." There was a pause, a deep inhale. "I know how you all saw me. Emotional, dramatic, reckless. And maybe I was, but I was never dishonest. I was never pretending. Every time I made noise, it was because I was drowning in silence." Anne sat perfectly still, eyes focused on the box, as Diana's voice filled the room. It wasn't just sound. It was presence. "I lost a child. Her name was Elizabeth Rose. You know that now. I carried that grief like a second skin. Not because I had to, but because no one would have known what to do with it if I shared it. Especially not him." A longer pause now. Then her voice returned, slightly cracked. "I loved Charles. I still do. Not in the way I used to. Not the fairy tale. I loved the man who existed beneath the crown. The one who laughed with the boys, who once held my hand and said, 'Don't let them change you.' But he didn't protect me, and I couldn't protect him." Another breath. "There are things I wish I had said to him, but I think you already know what they are. And maybe it's better he never hears them from me. Maybe it's better they come from someone who wasn't trying to be loved by him." Anne swallowed hard. "I wanted to come back. Not for reconciliation, not for revenge. I just wanted to find my place again. Something quiet, something honest. I was ready to put the past down, but the past wasn't ready to let me go." The tape crackled softly as her voice faltered. "I'm afraid, Anne. I don't know who to name. I don't have proof. Just instincts. But I know someone wants me silent. They want the story to end with Paris, with flashing lights, with broken glass. But that's not the ending I choose." The final moments came slowly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "If I'm gone, let them remember me as I was in between the headlines. Not the scandals, not the glamour, just me. The girl who tried, the mother who loved, the woman who learned too late what peace really meant." Silence. Then a final, trembling line. "Thank you for seeing me, Anne, even when no one else did." The tape clicked softly and whirred to a stop. Anne remained frozen, the sound of the room pressing in around her. Not even during the funeral, not even at the memorial services, had Diana felt this close, this present. She had been gone for 28 years, and yet she had never been more alive than in that moment. The room had grown darker. The windows, once glowing with afternoon light, now reflected the pale shadows of evening. The cassette player sat motionless. The tape had stopped long ago, but Diana's voice still lingered, not just in the air, but inside Anne. She hadn't moved in minutes. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, the box still open beside her. It wasn't just the weight of the contents that held her still. It was the weight of what they meant. Anne had never wanted to carry someone else's story. She'd spent a lifetime resisting the narratives imposed on her. The cold one, the quiet one, the spare. But now she held someone else's story in full. One that had been reduced to tabloid headlines, funeral tributes, and hollow praise. Diana had entrusted her with something no one else had seen. And now Anne had to decide what to do with it. She stood and walked slowly to the window. The garden below was still, untouched. She could see the apple trees planted in her mother's final years. For a moment, she imagined Diana out there, barefoot in the grass, laughing with the boys. No photographers, no motorcade, just Diana, as she had been in rare, private moments, free. The grief Anne felt now was not for Diana's death. That grief had been acknowledged, observed, saluted with black armbands and floral tributes. This grief was for the woman who had survived long enough to realize she had no place left in the world she once believed in. Anne turned from the window and crossed to a side cabinet. Inside was a fireproof lockbox. She had kept it for decades. It held a handful of personal items no archivist had ever touched. Letters from her father during naval service, a sketch drawn by Zara when she was 6, a single dried rose from her mother's funeral. She opened it, cleared a space, and gently placed Diana's sealed letters, the locket, the diary entries, and the cassette tape inside. She paused before closing it. Her hand hovered over the envelope marked Charles's Eyes Only. She opened it and skimmed it again. Diana hadn't sent this letter to her brother. She had sent it to Anne, the one person she believed wouldn't burn it, leak it, or spin it into palace narrative. And Anne wouldn't, because she finally understood something no royal directive had ever taught her. Sometimes protecting the monarchy meant protecting the truth, and sometimes it meant protecting the people history tried to rewrite. She closed the lid and locked it. Then she moved to her desk and pulled out her journal, one she had kept quietly for years, tucked beneath outdated briefing notes and never shown to anyone. On a fresh page, she began to write. August 5th, 2025. Today I heard her voice again. She paused. She was frightened. She was clear. She was brave. I used to think silence was strength, but maybe silence is only strength when it's chosen, not when it's imposed. Diana didn't ask me to avenge her. She asked me to remember her, not as a symbol, as a woman, as a mother, as someone trying to come home. Anne stared at the words, then underlined the final sentence. She would not make a public statement. She would not call a press conference, or give the letters to historians, or include Diana's diary in any official archive. That wasn't what this was. This was a private truth, a sacred one, not for the world, but maybe, someday, for the boys. She looked again at the photograph. Diana and her sons sitting on the lawn, sunlight in their hair. No titles between them, just family. That was who Diana had been beneath the crown. That was who she wanted to be remembered as. Anne stood and placed the photograph beside the safe, where it could remain in view but out of reach. Then she returned to the desk, lifted the now empty jewelry box, and closed the lid. She sat in silence for a long time. And then, without warning or ceremony, her composure gave way. Not a sob, not a collapse, just tears. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. Tears for the girl the palace had never known what to do with. Tears for the daughter buried in secret. Tears for a sister-in-law she had never properly grieved, because she had never truly understood what had been lost. When the tears passed, Anne rose. There was work to be done. The next day held engagements, ribbon cuttings, handshakes. She would carry on, as she always had. But now she carried something else, too. A promise. Diana's story didn't end in a Paris tunnel. It didn't end in the flash of cameras or under the weight of public grief. The real ending, the quiet one, was sealed inside a jewelry box that waited 28 years to be opened. Not by a king, not by her sons, but by the one person who had never tried to rewrite her. Princess Anne. She had always been the silent one, the steady hand, the royal who wore her duty like armor and never once faltered under its weight. To the world, she was impenetrable, unshakable. But inside her private study, surrounded by handwritten letters, unseen photographs, and a locket bearing the name of a lost child, even Anne broke. And when she did, something beautiful happened. Not loud, not public, just honest. Because Diana's voice, captured in ink and on tape, wasn't crying out for vindication. She wasn't seeking revenge or rewriting history. She wasn't trying to drag the monarchy through scandal again. She just wanted to be seen, fully, truthfully, as more than a symbol, as a woman who had loved and lost, who had been adored and abandoned, who had laughed with her children and cried in her silence, who had fought for herself, and when that failed, tried to protect others instead. And in the end, it was Anne, stoic, unbending Anne, who listened. That's the part the world will never know. Because Anne didn't release the letters. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't call for an inquiry. She did something far more difficult. She chose to remember. Diana's final gift wasn't meant to bring down an institution. It wasn't designed to fuel headlines or royal gossip. It was her last hope that someone would hold on to the truth, even if the world never saw it. That's exactly what Anne did. Some truths aren't meant to be shouted. Some stories don't need rewriting. They need preserving. Quietly, carefully, and completely. The photograph now resting near Anne's private safe doesn't bear a crown, or a title, or a frame of gold. It shows a mother in jeans sitting in the grass with her sons, laughing like the cameras weren't watching. That is the memory Anne chose to keep. That is the version of Diana that now lives on, not in documentaries or biographies, but in the one royal who never tried to define her. She just saw her. And sometimes that is enough, because legacy isn't built in marble or headlines. It lives in moments, in memories, in the truth, protected by the only person who never needed to prove she was listening. Princess Anne didn't say a word, but she heard everything, and she never forgot.